Jake Morrison crouched behind the twisted metal remains of what used to be a yellow taxicab 3 years ago, before the Zalathi came and turned Earth into their personal mining operation. The alien ship still hummed overhead like angry metal. Wasps, their blue lights scanning the ruins of New York City for any signs of human resistance. Jake pressed his back against the cold concrete wall and checked his weapon, a modified plasma rifle he had taken from a dead Zalathi soldier last month. Maria Santos crawled up beside him, her dark hair covered in dust and debris. She had been a NASA engineer before the invasion, designing rockets that were supposed to take humans to the stars. Now she spent her days figuring out how to blow up the aliens who had brought the stars to them instead. Kyle Bennett moved up on Jake's other side, his pack full of homemade explosives that could punch holes in Zalathi armor if you got close enough. The three humans watched the alien supply depot across the street. It was built inside what used to be Grand Central Station, but now the beautiful old building was covered in the strange purple metal that the Zalathi used for everything. 2 alien guards stood at the entrance, their tall, thin bodies covered in the same purple armor. They communicated without speaking, their large black eyes glowing softly as they shared thoughts through their collective mind. Jake had learned to hate that glow. It meant they were talking to each other in ways humans could never understand. The Zalathi did not need words or sounds to share information. They simply thought at each other, and somehow their minds connected across space. It made them perfect. Soldiers because they always knew what their teammates were thinking and planning. The Resistance had tried many times to fight the aliens using normal military tactics, but it never worked. The Zalathi could predict every human move because they shared all their knowledge instantly. When one alien learned something, they all learned it at the same time. It was like fighting against an enemy that had 1,000,000 eyes and 1,000,000 brains all working together. Maria tapped Jake on the shoulder and pointed to a small service door on the side of the building. They had studied this depot for weeks, watching the patterns of the guards and mapping the inside layout. Today was their best chance to steal some of the energy cells that powered Zalathi weapons. The Resistance needed those power sources desperately. Jake signaled to Kyle, who nodded and began setting up his equipment. In 5 minutes, he would create a distraction on the far side of the building to draw the guards away. Then Jake and Maria would have maybe 3 minutes to get inside, grab what they could, and get out before the aliens realized what was happening. The plan started perfectly. Kyle's explosion lit up the night sky, and both guards ran toward the sound, their weapons ready. Jake and Maria sprinted across the empty street and reached the service door just as Jake had calculated. Maria quickly hacked the alien lock using tools she had built from stolen Zalathi technology. Inside the depot, Jake saw rows and rows of strange alien equipment. Energy cells glowed in neat stacks, each one containing enough power to run a human city for a month. But what caught his attention was something else entirely. In the center of the room sat a large crystal that pulsed with the same soft light he had seen in alien eyes. Jake moved closer to the crystal and suddenly felt something strange happen in his mind. The usual background noise that had filled his thoughts since the invasion suddenly went quiet. He had not even realized it was there until it stopped. It was like someone had turned off a radio that had been playing static in another room. Maria was filling her pack with energy cells when she noticed Jake standing motionless near the crystal. She called his name, but he did not respond. The crystals. Light was getting brighter, and Jake felt something trying to push into his thoughts. But instead of the crystal controlling him like it should have, something else happened. The crystal's light began to flicker and fade. Suddenly, alarms started screaming throughout the building. But these were not the usual Zalathi alarms. These sounded panicked and confused. Jake reached out and touched the crystal with his bare hand. The moment his skin made contact, the crystal went completely dark, and every piece of Zalathi equipment in the room shut down. Maria grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him toward the exit. They could hear alien voices outside, but the voices sounded wrong. Instead of the usual calm coordination, the Zalathi were shouting, and their voices carried emotions Jake had never heard from them before. Fear, confusion, panic. The two humans ran through the darkened streets, while Zalathi ships crashed into buildings around them. Whatever Jake had done to that crystal had affected every alien in the area. For the first time since the invasion began, the Zalathi collective mind had been broken, even if only for a few minutes. When they reached their hidden base in the subway, tunnels, Kyle was already waiting for them. He had watched the chaos from a distance and seen Zalathi soldiers stumbling around like they were drunk or sick. Jake sat down heavily on an old wooden crate and tried to understand what had happened. Something about him was different from other humans. Something the aliens had not expected and did not understand. Something that might just give humanity its first real chance to fight back. Jake Morrison pulled the stolen Zalathi uniform over his head and tried not to think about the alien soldier who had died wearing it 2 days ago. The purple fabric felt cold against his skin and smelled like something between metal and flowers. He had spent hours learning to walk like the aliens did, with their strange gliding steps and the way they held their arms close to their bodies. The Zalathi research facility rose out of the Nevada desert like a giant metal mushroom. It had been built on top of what used to be a secret military base, but now it served a much darker purpose. This was where the aliens brought human prisoners to study them like laboratory animals. Intelligence reports said they were trying to understand how human minds worked so they could control them better. Jake approached the main gate with a group of alien workers returning from their shift. He kept his head down and tried to copy their movements. The security scanner at the entrance sent a beam of blue light over each worker as they passed through. When the light hit Jake, he felt the same strange sensation he had experienced at the depot. Something in his mind pushed back against the alien technology. The scanner flickered and went dark for a moment, but the guards did not seem to notice. They were too busy with their own thoughts and communications. Jake walked through the gate and into the most heavily guarded Zalathi facility on the planet. Inside the building, Jake followed signs written in the flowing alien language he had learned to read during months of studying captured equipment. The research laboratories were on the lower levels, buried deep underground where no human rescue attempt could reach them. He passed groups of alien scientists who moved through the halls like ghosts, their minds connected to the collective consciousness that guided all Zalathi actions. In the elevator, Jake stood next to 3 alien researchers who were discussing their work in the strange way Zalathi communicated. They shared images and concepts directly between their minds instead of using words. Jake caught fragments of their thoughts and saw pictures of human brains connected to machines and alien devices measuring human emotions. The elevator doors opened on level 7, and Jake stepped out into a corridor lined with glass cells. Inside, each cell was a human prisoner, and most of them wore devices on their heads that connected to alien computers. The machines were measuring their brain activity while the aliens watched from control rooms filled with monitors and data screens. Jake moved carefully down the corridor, looking for any sign of the person he had come to find. Intelligence reports mentioned a human scientist who had been captured during the early days of the invasion. Dr. Lisa Chang had been working on projects that might help the Resistance understand alien technology better. He found her in Cell 47, sitting at a desk covered with alien equipment and human brain scans. She was younger than Jake had expected, maybe 30 years old, with long black hair and tired eyes. The cell door was not locked because the aliens used mental control instead of physical barriers to keep their prisoners from escaping. Jake activated the device Maria had built for him, a small electronic box that generated the same kind of interference he had accidentally created at the depot. The alien monitoring equipment in Lisa's cell flickered and went offline. She looked up from her work with surprise and confusion. Jake pulled off his alien disguise and whispered his name. Lisa stared at him for a long moment before she understood what was happening. A human had somehow infiltrated the most secure alien facility on Earth and disabled their security systems just by being near them. Lisa quickly gathered the most important research files and data storage devices from her desk. She explained in whispers that the aliens had forced her to study human neural patterns for 3 years. They wanted to understand why some humans could resist their mental control better than others. What they had discovered was something they could not understand or accept. The Zalathi had evolved on a planet where every living thing shared thoughts and emotions through a collective consciousness. Individual thinking was unknown to them. They could not imagine a mind that operated alone, making decisions without input from others. To them, human individuality was like a disease or a dangerous mutation. Lisa had learned that human brains produced random electrical patterns that confused alien technology. Most humans only created small amounts of this interference, but a few produced so much that they could completely disable Zalathi systems. The aliens called these humans chaos generators and considered them the most dangerous threat to their empire. As they moved through the facility toward an emergency exit Lisa knew about, she explained that Jake was the strongest chaos generator she had ever measured. His brain produced interference patterns that were hundreds of times more powerful than normal humans. When he was near Zalathi technology, his thoughts created feedback that crashed their systems like a computer virus. They reached the exit just as alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The alien security team had discovered that their monitoring systems were failing in a pattern that followed Jake's movement through the building. Zalathi soldiers were already moving to block all the exits. Jake and Lisa ran through the desert toward an old mining tunnel where Maria and Kyle were waiting with transportation. Behind them, Zalathi aircraft searched the night sky with bright spotlights, but something strange was happening to the alien pilots. When they flew too close to Jake, their navigation systems failed and several aircraft crashed into the desert sand. By the time they reached the tunnel, Jake understood that he was not just another human resistance fighter. He was a weapon that the aliens could not defend against and could not understand. His very existence challenged everything the Zalathi believed about consciousness and control. Lisa had brought with her detailed information about Zalathi psychology and technology. She knew which systems were most vulnerable to the kind of interference Jake could generate. More importantly, she knew how to find other humans who might have similar abilities. The Resistance now had its first real advantage in the war against the alien Overlords. They had someone who could walk through Zalathi defenses like they did not exist and turn the aliens' greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Jake Morrison stood in the center of what used to be the main hall of Grand Central Station, but now served as the secret meeting place for resistance leaders from across the continent. The broken ceiling let in streams of sunlight that illuminated faces he had not seen in months. These were the survivors, the humans who had refused to give up even when the entire world seemed lost. Dr. Lisa Chang had set up her equipment in the corner of the hall, strange devices that could measure the electrical patterns in human brains. Over the past 2 weeks, she had tested every resistance fighter who could make the dangerous journey to New York. The results were better than anyone had dared to hope. Maria Santos watched the crowd of resistance fighters and refugees with a mixture of hope and worry. Word had spread through the underground networks that Jake Morrison could disable alien technology just by being near it. People were calling him everything from a miracle to a secret weapon. But Maria knew that one person, no matter how special, could not win a war against an entire alien empire. Alex Turner had arrived 3 days ago from what was left of the military resistance in Colorado. He was a former Army strategist who had been fighting a guerrilla war in the mountains since the invasion began. His forces had learned to avoid direct confrontation with the aliens, but they had never been able to strike a meaningful blow against the occupation. When Lisa tested Alex, her equipment detected the same chaos patterns that made Jake so dangerous to alien technology. Alex could not disable systems as completely as Jake could, but he could create enough interference to disrupt alien communications and navigation. He was the second confirmed chaos generator they had found. Nina Rodriguez had been hiding in the ruins of Silicon Valley using her computer programming skills to hack into alien data networks. She had discovered ways to inject viruses into Zalathi computer systems, but her attacks only worked for short periods before the aliens adapted their defenses. When Lisa tested Nina, the results showed she had the strongest chaos generation abilities after Jake himself. The testing continued as more resistance fighters arrived from hidden bases across the country. They found a former police officer from Detroit who could make alien weapons jam just by touching them. A teacher from Phoenix whose presence caused alien surveillance drones to fly in circles. A mechanic from Seattle who could walk through Zalathi security fields without triggering any alarms. By the end of the week, they had identified 23 humans with measurable chaos generation abilities. Lisa calculated that if this ratio held true across the entire human population, there might be as many as 700,000 people worldwide who could naturally resist alien control. Most of them probably did not even know they had this ability. Jake gathered the confirmed chaos generators around Lisa's equipment and began planning the first coordinated resistance operation since the invasion. Instead of hiding and running, they were going to attack multiple alien installations simultaneously. The goal was not just to cause damage, but to prove to other humans that the aliens could be defeated. Alex spread out maps of alien facilities across the former United States. Mining operations, research laboratories, communication centers, and military bases were marked in red across the country. He had been studying Zalathi tactics for 3 years and knew their weaknesses better than anyone else in the resistance. The aliens depended completely on their technology and their collective consciousness. When their equipment failed, they became confused and disoriented. When their mental connection to other aliens was disrupted, they made mistakes and poor decisions. A coordinated attack by chaos generators could turn their greatest advantages into fatal weaknesses. Nina explained how she could use her programming skills to create devices that would amplify the chaos generation effect. She had been working with Lisa to build small electronic boxes that could record and replay the brain patterns of chaos generators. If they could place these devices throughout alien facilities, they could create dead zones where no Zalathi technology would function properly. Maria worried about the risks of such an ambitious plan. The aliens would certainly respond with overwhelming force. They might start executing human prisoners or destroying entire cities in retaliation. But Jake argued that humanity was already dying slowly under alien rule. Taking a big risk was better than accepting certain defeat. The plan they developed was more complex than anything the Resistance had attempted before. Chaos generators would infiltrate 12 different alien facilities across the continent, each carrying Nina's amplification devices. At exactly the same time, they would activate the devices and begin their attacks. Kyle Bennett and his demolition teams would provide explosives and technical support. Other Resistance fighters would coordinate simultaneous uprisings at human, labor camps, and mining operations. The goal was to overwhelm the alien response system and free as many human prisoners as possible. While the Resistance fighters prepared for the operation, something else was happening in the Zalathi command structure. High Commander Zeltar had been studying reports of the technology failures that seemed to follow Jake Morrison wherever he went. The alien commander had lived for over 300 years and had conquered dozens of worlds for the Zalathi Empire, but he had never encountered anything like this human anomaly. Zeltar ordered his scientists to analyze every piece of data about the chaos generation phenomenon. What they discovered challenged fundamental Zalathi beliefs about consciousness and reality. The idea that individual minds could operate independently without collective guidance was so alien to them that many Zalathi scientists refused to accept the evidence. But Zeltar was a practical military commander. He did not care about scientific theories or philosophical implications. He only cared about eliminating threats to Zalathi control over Earth. He began developing new weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter the chaos generation effect. The stage was set for the first real battle between human individuality and alien collective consciousness. Jake Morrison and his network of chaos generators were about to discover whether the power of individual human minds could break the chains that had enslaved their entire species. The Resistance had found its weapon, and now it was time to see if that weapon could win them their freedom. Jake Morrison checked his watch as he crouched in the shadows outside the Zalathi mining facility in what used to be Montana. In exactly 30 seconds, chaos generators across the continent would begin the largest coordinated attack in Resistance history. The amplification devices Nina had built were already in place throughout the facility, hidden among the alien equipment like electronic time bombs waiting to disrupt everything the Zalathi depended on. Alex Turner's voice crackled through the stolen alien communication device, confirming that his team was in position at the Colorado Research Center. Nina Rodriguez reported ready from the California command post, while other chaos generators checked in from facilities in Texas, Florida, and 8 other locations. For the first time since the invasion, humans were about to strike back with a weapon the aliens could not understand or defend against. The countdown reached 0 and Jake activated his amplification device. Immediately, every piece of Zalathi technology within 100 meters began to malfunction. Security cameras went dark, alarm systems failed, and the massive mining equipment ground to a halt with mechanical groans that echoed across the empty landscape. Inside the facility, Zalathi workers stumbled through corridors as their collective consciousness link flickered in and out of existence. They had never experienced individual thought before, and the sudden isolation terrified them more than any physical weapon could have. Some aliens collapsed from the shock of being alone in their own minds for the first time in their lives. Jake moved through the facility like a ghost, his very presence causing Zalathi computers to crash and communication systems to shut down. He reached the main control room where dozens of human prisoners worked under alien supervision. The moment he entered the room, their electronic restraints deactivated and the prison doors swung open automatically. The liberated humans stared at Jake with amazement and confusion. They had been slaves for 3 years, forced to operate mining equipment under constant alien supervision. Now their captors were fleeing in panic while their prisons simply fell apart around them. Similar scenes played out across the continent as other chaos generators struck their targets. Alex Turner led his team through the Colorado Research Facility, shutting down alien experiments and freeing human test subjects. Nina Rodriguez hacked into the California command post's central computer and downloaded terabytes of alien military intelligence while the facility's security systems collapsed around her. The attack succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Within 2 hours, 12 major alien installations had been completely disabled and over 5,000 human prisoners had been freed. Zalathi response teams sent to investigate the attacks found their own equipment failing as they approached the facilities. But the victory came with a terrible price. High Commander Zeltar had been monitoring human resistance activities for months, waiting for exactly this kind of coordinated attack. The moment the chaos generators revealed themselves, he put his own plan into motion. Across the planet, Zalathi forces surrounded every known human settlement and labor camp. Giant screens appeared in the sky above major cities, showing Zeltar's face as he addressed the human population directly. His voice was translated into every human language as he delivered an ultimatum that froze the blood of every resistance fighter. The alien commander announced that the Zalathi Empire had captured over 1 million human civilians in the past 24 hours. These prisoners were being held at secure locations across the globe, far from any chaos generators who might disrupt their detention systems. Unless Jake Morrison surrendered himself within 72 hours, all of the prisoners would be executed. To prove he was serious, Zeltar ordered the public execution of 100 prisoners in Times Square. The massacre was broadcast on every working screen in New York City, showing exactly what would happen to 1 million more humans if Jake did not give himself up. Jake watched the execution footage from the resistance base, his hands shaking with rage and helplessness. The chaos generation ability that had seemed like humanity's salvation was now being used against them. The aliens had turned his greatest strength into his greatest weakness by threatening innocent lives. Maria Santos tried to convince Jake that surrendering would not save the prisoners. The aliens would kill them anyway once they had what they wanted. But Jake could not shake the image of those 100 humans dying because of actions he had authorized. Alex Turner argued for a military solution, proposing immediate attacks on the prisoner-holding facilities. But Lisa Chang pointed out that they did not know where most of the prisoners were being held, and the aliens had specifically chosen locations where chaos generators could not operate effectively. Nina Rodriguez suggested they could hack into alien communication networks to locate the prisoners, but Zeltar had anticipated this possibility. All Zalathi systems had been upgraded with new security protocols designed specifically to counter human interference. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Jake found himself facing an impossible choice. He could surrender and hope the aliens would honor their agreement to spare the prisoners. But that would mean the end of the resistance and the loss of humanity's only effective weapon against the occupation. Or he could refuse to surrender and watch 1 million innocent humans die because of his decision. Either choice seemed to guarantee defeat for the human race. Kyle Bennett and his demolition teams proposed desperate rescue missions, but everyone knew the odds of success were nearly zero. The aliens had learned from their mistakes and were no longer vulnerable to the same tactics that had worked before. In his private moments, Jake wondered if this had always been Zeltar's plan. Let the humans believe they had found a way to win, then use their own compassion and morality against them. The aliens understood human psychology better than humans had realized. With 24 hours left until the deadline, Jake Morrison sat in the ruins of what used to be his world and tried to find a third option that might save both the prisoners and the resistance. He was the human who had brought hope back to his species, but now that same hope might be the weapon that destroyed them all. The war between individual consciousness and collective control had reached its most critical moment, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Jake Morrison walked slowly across the empty plaza toward the Zalathi transport ship, his hands raised above his head in surrender. Television cameras from around the world focused on him as he approached the group of alien soldiers waiting to take him into custody. He had made his choice with only 6 hours left until the deadline, and now 1 million human lives depended on whether High Commander Zeltar would keep his word. But this surrender was not what it appeared to be. Hidden beneath Jake's clothes was a small device that Nina Rodriguez had built in their final desperate hours together. It looked like a simple metal disc, but it contained something far more dangerous than any explosive. It was a recording of Jake's own brain patterns, compressed and amplified in ways that even Lisa Chang did not fully understand. Alex Turner watched from a concealed position 3 blocks away, his team ready to move the moment Jake gave the signal. They had spent the past 18 hours preparing for what everyone knew was probably a suicide mission. The alien mothership orbiting Earth was the most heavily defended location in the solar system, but it was also where Zeltar would take Jake for interrogation and study. The Zalathi soldiers surrounded Jake with weapons that could disintegrate a human body in seconds. Their black eyes glowed with the soft light that meant they were sharing information through their collective consciousness. They seemed pleased that the troublesome human had finally been captured. One of the soldiers placed an electronic collar around Jake's neck, a device designed to suppress the chaos generation effect that made him so dangerous to alien technology. Jake felt the familiar sensation of his thoughts being pressed and contained, like trying to breathe through a thick cloth. but the suppression was not perfect, and he could feel small amounts of interference still leaking through. The transport. Ship rose into the sky with Jake secured in a containment cell designed specifically for him. Through the small window, he could see other ships carrying his resistance fighters to rescue positions around the globe. Maria Santos was leading a team to coordinate uprisings at the prisoner camps, while Kyle Bennett prepared explosives that would be triggered when Jake reached the mothership. High Commander Zeltar was waiting for Jake in the main interrogation chamber of the mothership, a vast room filled with alien technology designed to study and analyze human consciousness. The alien commander stood over 2 meters tall, his purple skin marked with the scars of battles fought across dozens of worlds. His eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator who had never known defeat. Zeltar spoke to Jake in perfect English, his voice carrying undertones that suggested vast experience with conquering other species. He explained that humans were not the first race to develop individuals who could resist collective consciousness, but they were by far the most dangerous he had encountered. The alien commander had spent months studying Jake's effect on Zalathi technology, and he believed he understood the source of the chaos generation ability. Human minds had evolved in isolation, developing individual consciousness as a survival mechanism. This created thought patterns that were completely random and unpredictable to species that shared collective awareness. But Zeltar had also discovered something that even Lisa Chang had not realized. The chaos generation effect was not just a defensive mechanism. Under the right conditions, it could be weaponized in ways that could threaten the entire Zalathi collective consciousness network. This was why Jake had to be captured and studied, then eliminated before he could learn to use his full potential. The interrogation began with devices that tried to map the structure of Jake's thoughts and emotions. But the electronic collar was not working as well as the aliens had expected. Small amounts of chaos interference continued to leak out, causing minor malfunctions in the interrogation equipment. Jake pretended to be helpless while secretly studying the alien technology around him. He had learned more about Zalathi psychology during his weeks of planning with Lisa and Nina, and now he could see things that had been invisible to him before. The aliens were not as unified as they appeared. There were subtle differences in their behavior that suggested individual personalities hidden beneath their collective consciousness. When Zeltar left him alone for a few hours, Jake activated Nina's device. The recorded brain patterns began, broadcasting at frequencies designed to penetrate Zalathi mental networks. The effect was subtle at first, just small glitches in the ship's communication systems. But as the device continued operating, the interference began to spread through the mothership's central computer network. Meanwhile, Alex Turner's rescue mission was already in motion. Using captured Zalathi ships, his team approached the mothership, disguised as a routine supply convoy. Other resistance fighters were simultaneously attacking alien installations on Earth, drawing attention away from the rescue operation. The plan depended on Jake creating enough chaos aboard the mothership to disable its defenses at exactly the right moment. But as he explored the ship during a supposed bathroom break, Jake discovered something that changed everything. The mothership's central consciousness hub was not just a computer system. It was a living network that connected every Zalathi mind across the galaxy. Jake realized that if he could access that network directly, he might be able to do more than just rescue the prisoners. He might be able to strike at the heart of the entire Zalathi Empire, but it would require him to remove the suppression collar and risk exposing his full chaos generation ability to every alien on the ship. The choice was simple, but terrifying. He could play it safe and hope the rescue mission succeeded, or he could gamble everything on a plan that might either free humanity or drive him insane. As alarms began sounding throughout the mothership, Jake made his decision. He crushed Nina's device in his hand, sending a massive surge of chaos interference through the ship's systems. Every light went out and every computer crashed simultaneously. In the darkness, Jake began removing the electronic collar that had been suppressing his true potential. High Commander Zeltar was about to learn what happened when human individuality met alien collective consciousness in direct battle. Jake Morrison stood in the central consciousness hub of the Zalathi mothership, surrounded by pulsing crystals and flowing streams of energy that connected every alien mind across the galaxy. The electronic collar lay in pieces at his feet, and, for the first time since his capture, he could feel his full chaos generation ability flowing freely through his thoughts. The chamber was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Thousands of crystal formations reached from floor to ceiling, each one glowing with the soft light that represented a different sector of the Zalathi Empire. Jake could sense the minds of millions of aliens flowing through the network, like digital rivers carrying thoughts and emotions across impossible distances. High Commander Zeltar burst into the chamber with a squad of elite guards, their weapons charged and ready to kill the human who had somehow disabled their most secure facility. But when they saw Jake standing among the consciousness crystals, something like fear crossed the alien commander's face for the first time in his 300-year life. Jake reached out with his mind and felt the edge of the Zalathi network, a vast collective consciousness that had guided their species for thousands of years. It was like standing at the shore of an infinite ocean of shared thoughts and memories. Every Zalathi who had ever lived had contributed to this network, creating a repository of knowledge and experience that spanned entire galaxies. But Jake also sensed something the aliens themselves had never realized. The network was not as stable as they believed. It depended on every connected mind thinking in harmony, sharing the same basic assumptions about reality and consciousness. The introduction of truly individual thoughts would be like throwing chaos into a perfectly ordered system. Zeltar ordered his guards to fire, but their weapons were already malfunctioning from Jake's proximity. The alien commander tried to access the emergency systems that could seal off the consciousness hub, but every computer in the chamber had crashed the moment Jake removed his suppression collar. Instead of trying to destroy the network, Jake did something that no Zalathi had ever imagined possible. He reached out with his chaotic human consciousness and connected directly to their collective mind. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Jake's individual thoughts poured into the network like a virus, spreading through millions of connected alien minds at the speed of light. For the first time in their evolutionary history, Zalathi across the galaxy began to experience individual consciousness. They felt doubt, confusion, and the terrifying isolation of being alone in their own minds. Some aliens went insane from the shock of sudden individuality. Others fled in panic as their shared reality collapsed around them. But a few began to understand what they had been missing all their lives. They experienced the strange joy of making decisions without consulting the collective, of having private thoughts that belonged to them alone. The Zalathi Empire began to fragment as individual aliens questioned orders they had always followed without thinking. Military commanders found themselves unable to coordinate their forces when their soldiers started acting independently. Scientists abandoned projects they had worked on for decades, suddenly wondering why they had never asked if their research was right or wrong. Zeltar himself was not immune to the effect. As Jake's consciousness touched his mind through the network, the alien commander experienced individual thought for the first time. The sensation was overwhelming and terrifying, but also strangely liberating. For 300 years he had served the collective without question, but now he began to wonder if there might be other ways to live. Alex Turner's rescue team reached the mothership just as the consciousness network collapsed. They found Zalathi, crew members wandering the corridors in confusion, no longer able to coordinate their responses to the human invasion. The ship's defenses had shut down completely, leaving it helpless against even the small force Alex had brought. On Earth, similar chaos was spreading through every Zalathi installation. alien guards abandoned their posts as they struggled to understand their new individual awareness. Human prisoners walked out of camps, whose electronic locks had failed along with everything else that depended on the collective consciousness network. Maria Santos led uprisings across the planet as the alien occupation forces fell apart. Without their shared mind to guide them, most Zalathi simply surrendered or fled. A few tried to fight back individually, but they had no experience with independent decision-making and were easily defeated by humans who had spent their entire lives thinking for themselves. But the most profound changes were happening inside the consciousness hub, where Jake remained connected to the failing network. He could feel the entire Zalathi civilization transforming as millions of aliens experienced individual thought for the first time. Some were adapting to their new awareness, while others were retreating to isolated colonies where they tried to rebuild smaller collective networks. When Jake finally disconnected from the network, he found Zeltar sitting among the darkened crystals with his head in his hands. The alien commander looked up at Jake with eyes that now held something they had never contained before: individual personality and independent thought. Zeltar spoke slowly, his voice carrying emotions that no Zalathi had ever expressed. He thanked Jake for showing him what he had been missing all his life, but he also mourned the loss of the collective consciousness that had defined his entire species. He was no longer high commander of anything, because the empire he had served no longer existed. The war was over, but the victory was more complex than anyone had expected. Jake had not destroyed the Zalathi. He had transformed them into something entirely new. Some of the newly individual aliens chose to leave Earth and search for their own paths among the stars. Others decided to stay and learn from humans how to live as independent beings. A few Zalathi, including Zeltar himself, asked to join the human resistance in building a new kind of civilization. They wanted to create a society where collective consciousness and individual thought could coexist without either destroying the other. Jake Morrison had achieved something greater than military victory. He had proven that the power of individual, human consciousness was not just a weapon, but a gift that could transform entire civilizations. The chaos that the aliens had feared turned out to be the key to a kind of freedom they had never imagined possible. As Earth began to rebuild, Jake worked with former enemies to establish new protocols for contact between species with different types of consciousness. The universe was vast enough for both collective minds and individual thoughts, and perhaps the greatest strength of humanity was their ability to help others discover the freedom of thinking for themselves.